everyone, and welcome to another Zoom Into Books presentation sponsored by Headline Books and here on the Zoom Into Books Facebook page. Today we are chatting with a very special guest author, Bernard Dillard, the author of Two Til Midnight, which was a 2020 winner at the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. So we definitely want to congratulate Bernard on that achievement. During our presentation today, we will be taking time for questions at the end. So if you have any questions that you would like our presenter to answer, go ahead and type them into the comments section of this video. Also, we will be posting his bio along with a link to his website if you'd like to learn more about him after hearing his presentation today. So you can also look for that in the comments section. Also, if you have to leave early and you're not going to be able to stay through the whole presentation, don't worry. You'll be able to watch the replay here on our Facebook page as well as the Zoom Into Books YouTube channel. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Bernard Dillard, our special guest author for the day. Thank you so much for joining us, Bernard.
Well, thank you so much. I must admit, I am really excited, a little nervous to be here joining you guys, but I'm really thankful for the opportunity, and I hope we can kind of learn a lot during this particular session. Again, I'm Bernard Dillard. I'm a native of Durham, North Carolina, and currently living in the New York area now. So I've been here about 15 years, and just really excited about all the opportunities that are afforded me. By trade or by training, I'm a mathematician. So you may wonder, how did I win a novel award? Well, long story short is that I was actually in college. I was an English major, and I never quite let go of that part of me. So I don't know, I try not to dabble in too many different aspects of things, but that writing part of me will always be a part of who I am. So we can go ahead and start. Again, the name of the book that we're going to be talking about today is called Two Til Midnight, and it's a novel. So this is kind of what it looks like. No, nothing is wrong with your eyes, but the cover is special in that it's a horizontal orientation. And when you open it up and read it, it reads just like a regular novel, but this is probably more for marketing, anything else. When I'm on the train or something like that, people kind of look at it kind of crazy. They haven't really seen books that have a horizontal orientation, but you know, that is what it is. So we want to start by by talking about, I guess, the impetus behind the book. Where did it come from? Did it just come out of thin air? So we'll go ahead and begin now. So, oh goodness, there we go. So in terms of the genesis of the book, or where it came from, is really a confluence of several factors. And one of the main influences was at my school. I work here at a college in New York City. Perhaps you've heard of it, FIT. And one of the components, or one of the groups that faculty can join, is something called the Diversity Council. So I had an opportunity to become a part of the Diversity Council. And during my tenure, or during my involvement on the Diversity Council, as one might kind of guess, if it's a diversity council, then there are all kinds of people with different ideas that sit on the council. And a lot of times when we talk or discuss, not only do we bounce ideas off of each other, but because of our upbringings, because of kind of positions we hold, a lot of the discussions turn into head butting, you know. So a lot of the information from the novel, or a lot of the background from the novel, came from a lot of our interactions and how we didn't necessarily see eye to eye on everything. Another aspect of where this book came from, so this book is what I call a contemporary novel, and I was really kind of disappointed and kind of forlorn at a lot of the headlines I was seeing in the news a couple of years ago. For example, here's one: a transgender woman was killed. This is like in 2019. You may remember here just recently, I had to update this to stay current, but even just here recently, as of last week, the kind of symbols we've been privy to, or we've observed, this is not like 30 years ago. This is last week, a couple of weeks ago, where we had this rioting at the Capitol. And yeah, your eyes are not fooling you. That's like something called a gallows. And this is like now. Also, you may recognize some of these headlines from a couple of years ago, guy getting shot, or even overseas, where we have Christian church getting bombed, all in the name of trying to preserve, preserve who people think they are. But the idea is people don't seem really to be getting it in terms of how to deal with others that are not like them, that are foreign to, they may hold different ideologies. So that kind of provided the framework for the book in terms of my unrest and my disappointment with how things were kind of going in America. And I think as an artist, sometimes we tend to get in despair and stop writing or stop pursuing our art. And I'm reminded of when Toni Morrison, she was going through a slump herself, going through writer's block back in 2004. And like, I'm not a political person per se, but this is really, really interesting how she found herself not able to write or perform her talent because she was so engrossed in some of the depressing things of the day. And this quote right here recognizes, so this is not a quote by Morrison, this is actually a quote by one of her friends who gave her this advice when Toni Morrison herself got in a slump. She says, no, this is precisely the time when we are supposed to be writing, right? Not in times of dread, but in times when things are not fine. That's our job. So this kind of sort of sets the stage, at least for me, in terms of what kind of started the book. In a sense, the book was kind of more therapy for me. Not necessarily that I had the answers, but it allowed me to sort of sit back and just take a self-inventory, an inventory of where I was and where I thought our country needed to go. In the book itself, you can read the dedication, really simple, to those weak in the faith and for civility, with much of the emphasis being on the for civility part, because there's a lot I think we in America have to gain in terms of just the notion of being civil, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, just at a glance, we'll sort of do like a bird's eye view of the general nature of the book. It's primarily set in Las Vegas during Trumpian times. And the timing of this, I probably couldn't be better, because now we are, not necessarily in Trumpian times, with the inauguration, but there's still some things that the book focuses on in terms of giving you a sense of the culture of the book, a lot of the politics surrounding the book. And we're going to call this book a soap operatic dramedy. I don't know if anybody used to watch soap operas, but the notion of the book is that there are different plots that go on that are kind of silo plots that cross and intersect at certain points, right? So you may have this going on over here, this going on over here, and it's a dramedy. I don't know if you've heard that term before, but you can guess what two words are in there: drama, comedy. So there's some serious stuff that goes on, and then there's some laughter that goes on. So when we look at this community in Vegas, it's almost, I know it's set in Vegas, but to be honest, it's really anywheresville, USA, because you can go to any city or any country or any county rather, and look at the different challenges that exist and how people deal with them. So for example, you have racism, sexuality question, terrorism, all of these different topics that skyrocket or mushroom or become items of the day that we just have to deal with, I think, as citizens. I'm going to talk a little bit later about this aspect of the supernatural. That's quite interesting. I do weave the supernatural in here in a number of ways, and so we'll see how that works. And the chapters here are very bite-sized, and that's probably a function of the fact that normally when I read books, I'm often perturbed at the fact that chapters can be like 50 pages, it just really discourages me as a reader. So I was very intentional about making these chapters bite-sized, so I think the reader can experience a break quicker. Special shout out to my professor when I was in college, Dr. Dolores Stevens, who you see here. She actually wrote the foreword to the book. So I still stay in contact with her. She is a whippersnapper. She's very, very much still mentally sharp, and I really get a lot of encouragement from her. And also this next slide here is kind of funny. I call this More Than Just My Mama's Praise. And you know, your mom is supposed to tell you you're a good writer, right? But thankfully we have gotten it reviewed at different reputable places, and you can kind of see those there. One from the San Francisco Book Review, another from Publishers Daily Review. So it's more than my mama that's just saying that, hey, my baby's a good writer. Now I must warn us, even though this is, you know, we're the gist of the book pretty much talks about, as I mentioned before, being civil and how, and we'll mention this a little bit later, how people kind of interact with others that are not like them. But I do have to be honest and let you guys know that the book is for mature audiences only. And of course, when you say that, that means everybody younger than 18 will run and go get it, right? But I do have to be honest, and you can kind of look at the pictures here. There's some language that's foul, there's some violence, and you know, there's some interesting things that go on as represented by, in other words, it's very much a novel, right? And it keeps you on the edge of your seat, at least I think. But we have to really, really be careful that those 18 and above get there. So now let's talk about the overarching idea of the novel. We did submit a press release back in 2019. So if there had to be an overarching concept of the novel, is maybe summarized in this sentence here. So what is becoming of race, diversity, tolerance, and terrorism in these testy, turbulent times? I guess you can call that alliteration with all these T's together, right? But at the core, at the center of the book is, how do we basically treat each other? I know it's not really the best, you know, it's not really the topic that we really kind of think about when you talk about a novel. But I think the good part about this novel is that it's still relevant for today, right? The bad thing about the novel is that it's still relevant for today, right? Sometimes we have to question ourselves as to how far have we really come in just treating people right, okay? Again, the idea of diversity means that I don't necessarily have to see eye to eye with you, but I can at least respect your position without doing you harm, inflicting any violence. So this statement here kind of sums up the general essence of the book. I guess they would call it the elevator pitch. What is becoming of how we see people and how we treat people who are not like us. So again, we stress here, how do people act toward others who are completely different than themselves? You go into the notion of civility and what civility means. And without going into too much detail, the word civilis comes from Latin for citizen. And it's kind of about disagreeing agreeably or disagreeing without respect. Back in the 1990s, I don't know if you remember this quote from an unfortunate situation that happened with the Rodney King situation. And one thing he said before he passed was, can't we all just get along, right? And so we see here this visual of the sandbox of life. There was a writer way back when, Robert Fulghum, who wrote this book, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, my fear is that a lot of us must have sleep extra time during nap time during kindergarten, because we don't seem to have learned the lesson, right? And so I figured, well, what if we write a novel, not necessarily, again, that answers those questions. I'm a kind of person where I don't necessarily pose answers to everything. Like this book is not a book of answers, but it's a book where, a novel where I kind of step back and, at least I hope, ask the right questions. Or I set characters up in such a way that they're forced to face each other and to see how they deal with these kind of situations. I call this book, I know it's a novel, but I also call it a literary mirror, where we can kind of stand back, assess, am I like that character? If I am, should I change? How can I change, right? So that's the general idea. Now, to get into the novel structure, you see these 3 times here. You say, well, what does this have to do with anything? In terms of the novel structure, and it goes back to the title itself, you see 11:58, 11:59, and 12 o'clock. Well, what time is 11:58? It's 2 minutes till midnight. Hence the title of the book, 2 Til Midnight. 2 minutes till midnight, 11:58. And if you look at the book itself, at the cover, we tried to get a little creative where the title actually says 3 Til Midnight, and the 3 is crossed out. And now we have the 2 Til Midnight. Well, what does that suggest? And I'm not going to spoil anything. You have to get the book and kind of figure out. But the idea is that time is moving, right? So at one point, it really was 11:57. So there's this constant building to 12 o'clock. Something happens at 12 o'clock that you just kind of have to read about. But the idea is that there's this invisible, there's this marching toward something that, and I don't really call myself a mystery writer or a suspense writer per se, but I've been told by those who finished the book that they kind of were on edge trying to see what was going to happen at 12 o'clock. But the whole notion of time in the book is very interesting, because from 11:58 to 11:59, that's a whole host of pages, but it's only 1 minute, right? So, and so that's probably a whole nother talk, just the notion of time in the book, but that's definitely one of the things that could be discussed as it relates to the book itself. And the tagline of the book is simply this. It's actually written on the book itself. What will happen when the clock strikes 12? All right. So there's this hook, at least I think the hook is there from start to finish to sort of coach you along and ease you along until 12 o'clock. You will be shocked, at least I think so, and when you get to 12 o'clock and see what happens. So, but that's the general basic notion of the structure of the book. Now, in terms of the characters, now I could not list all of the characters in the book, but here are just a few, and they are deliberately created. And I know it's going to seem weird, but as an author, you kind of start off with, okay, this character, this is who this character is, and this is maybe what they'll do. But as the writing experience goes on, I was just sharing with some of the people earlier that it took me about 3 years to write this book. Well, because you got to do some research, you've got to make sure that the facts are the facts, right? Even though it's a novel, you still have to make sure the facts are the facts. But then even with the characters, you have to, at a certain point, the characters just kind of take over, right? I don't know if that really makes sense, but there were some things that happened in the book. I was telling the character, "Oh no, don't do that! No, how could you?" And I'm the author, right? But the characters kind of take on a life of their own, and I think it's interesting to see the interplay between these characters and how they interact. So, for example, the main protagonist is Dr. Garnett Gibbs. She's a history professor at UNLV. She's a devout woman, a woman of faith, and she's met with certain challenges with people in her world, right? And I won't go through all of these here, but I'll just kind of highlight a few. You have her adopted daughter, Jamae, and they're all raising their grandson, Red Jr., right? And he's getting to a point where he's asking a lot of questions, being influenced by the hip hop generation. And Dr. Gibbs has no idea about questions he's asking. She's, I mean, I don't want to call her a Luddite, but she really knows nothing about internet, whose book, Facebook. Okay, what is this stuff? So she's having to deal with a lot of the challenges of raising a grandson in this modern day. Now, Red's father, RJ's father, is Red Sr., who is serving overseas in Afghanistan. So just to give you a sense of the complexity of what goes on. So all of the action doesn't just go on in Las Vegas. Some happens in Jamaica, some happens in Afghanistan, right? So Rhett's father is serving in Afghanistan, and I haven't really, well, there are some novels that kind of address the military, especially on African-American families, the effects of that, but there are not too many. I did some research. You have Toni Morrison did a work called Home, where she's exploring the main protagonist as he's sort of coming back from the Korean War. You have John O'Killen's And Then We Heard the Thunder. And a lot of those works kind of juxtapose going to war in like World War II, serving your country, then coming back to a country that doesn't accept you and being met with segregation. Well, this one is a little bit different. Red Sr., he's serving the last tour, I think, under Obama's administration, and we're kind of seeing the impact of his absence on that particular family. So that's something quite interesting to watch. Now he's dealing with his own kind of drama overseas, and you have to sort of read about that there. We have Dr. West, who's a member of the LGBTQ community, Kamal and Manuela. Now this goes back to the fact that this is a work for those 18 and over, right? So they're a kinky church couple, and I don't know how else to say that, okay? Rusty, come on up, Rusty. He is unapologetically, and he's a self-avowed racist. Again, I created a lot of these characters because eventually they're going to meet up, and you're going to see how they interact and how they deal with each other. Rusty is very interesting because, you know, you think about this whole 40 acres and a mule thing. Well, Rusty doesn't care. As I said before, he'll piss on your 40 acres and he'll shoot your mule. That's just how racist he is. And it's easy to vilify him, I think, but I think it's important to at least look at things from his perspective, right? After all, that's what I guess being civil is, and at least understanding how he thinks. Now, I don't know about you, you're probably not going to change him. In fact, you'll see his wife is more progressive, but they could be no less oil and water, right? Rusty grew up in the 60s. He's very adamant about what he believes, and you know, all this immigration stuff, you can have it. All this equality stuff, you can have it. He's interested in preserving his ilk and his kind, right? So interesting to see what happens there. In fact, he makes a very interesting decision toward the end of the book that, well, I'll let you read about that. It's quite depressing, but you get to, and so you'll see here, and I say this kind of tongue in cheek, with all these different characters, and this is not even all of them, what could possibly go wrong? Now, I'm going to double back and talk about this infusion of the supernatural. This was a lofty idea on my part, and of course, coming up through school and being an English major, and even before, even in high school, there were certain authors that I read, Frank Peretti, and once I got to college, being an English major, of course, you're introduced to Shakespeare, Morrison, and other people. And these are certain writers who actually employ the knowledge of the supernatural, right? And it's tricky, at least it was for me. At first, I was trying to figure out how I was going to weave that in there. And again, I'm not going to give everything away, but I was very inspired by these writers who took that step, took that leap of faith, and tried to intertwine the supernatural in their work. For example, Shakespeare, you know, just even the most simple play like Macbeth, right? Julius Caesar, there's the appearance of the ghost. Of course, in Toni Morrison's book, Beloved, there's this ghost that sort of comes back. Well, you know, I don't mimic any of these writers, I don't think, but I'm very inspired by them. So, you know, if you see some weird things going on, I at least want to give you heads up on that. Even in TV, even on TV shows, Stranger Things, Lovecraft Country, there's this otherworldly kind of aspect that writers don't shy away from, right? So, and the only challenge with that, so I didn't want you to be alarmed, but the only challenge with that is that it is risky, because you don't want the writer to feel like they're reading two separate works, right? So is it seamless? Are you able to weave in what's going on in the regular plot with this supernatural dimension? Do they flow? Do they flow? So I don't know. I don't know if I got it right. I've started to get some feedback, and I've heard some people say, you know, it was handled pretty well, but I don't know. You have to make your own judgment on that. But that was just something as a writer I wanted to try and to see if it would go over smoothly. So just want to give you heads up on that in case something weird happens while you're reading it. At the end of the book, you'll see some discussion questions. I thought this was a really good idea. I actually got this idea from, I think it was The Wife. I think there's a book called The Wife or something like that, I forget. But you'll see here at the end, there are some, is what I call a discussion guide for reading groups or book clubs. And it just gives you different questions to maybe ponder in case you want to talk over with another person who's read the book. I think there are like 10 questions. And again, it's supposed to be a springboard of different things to consider as you're sort of going through the novel itself and sitting back to say, okay, what do we learn from this? Again, I never try to come across as if I have the answers, but I think what I'm really, really good at is raising questions for people to ponder and to sort of step back and sort of say, this work is, of course, it's a literary mirror, but it's also a subtle social commentary where I can kind of sit back and sort of take self-inventory to say, am I in one of these characters? Do I know somebody like this? And then where do we go from here? Now, I would like to do a couple of readings from the work here, what I call respect readings, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. So what I'm going to do is go through both scenarios to sort of give you a sense of what we're going to hear. And then after that, we're going to actually delve inside. So here's the first scenario. It comes from chapter 25, the chapter that's called All Black Lives Matter. And the background or the backdrop to what's going on, Officer George is one of the officers here. He has intervened and stopped a fellow colleague so both of these cops are white, from doing serious damage to an African-American college student at a frat party. After getting home, George prepares for bed and unwinds, discussing with his wife some of the frustrations of his job and where the world seems to be headed. So in this first reading, only two characters, George and Nancy, and George is kind of decompressing regarding the experience that he just underwent with his colleague, who was a little bit more animated than George. So that's going to be the first one that I read. And I'm going to go ahead and just preface both of these right now so that I can stop sharing this. The second one is going to be a little bit more animated. And I mentioned that at my school, I was part of the diversity committee. And so I kind of set up a similar diversity committee in the pages of the book. Now, there are several faculty and staff members that are there in attendance, and they have a guest speaker. And they're conducting an exercise called Standing Up for What's Right. The speaker's name is Becca. And I maintain that if she knew what was going to happen at this meeting, she probably wouldn't have accepted the invitation. So the name of this exercise is called Standing Up for What's Right, which means that certain statements are going to be read. And if you agree with them, you can't just say, yes, I agree, but you literally have to stand up. Well, we can see where that's going to go, right? So the main characters here are Marjorie, who I mentioned earlier. She's a philosophy professor, member of the LGBTQ community. And then also in attendance at the meeting is Lay, Dr. Lay, who was another professor who was an outspoken fundamentalist Christian believer. Okay. So we have that reading there. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing here and we're going to go ahead and read. And now remember this first scenario here is George kind of talking to his wife, based on the events that happened earlier today. Again, I won't go into too many details regarding what happened before, but it was a situation where a cop kind of got out of control and almost did some really terrible damage. So this is George talking. Honestly, Schmidt didn't seem like himself. Something had to be controlling him. If I hadn't said anything, I really think he would have shot the kid. Things were going that bad? Well, only because Schmidt kept pushing the issue. And the way he looked at me when I told him that was enough. He just had a different face. He spooned her and placed his arm around her stomach. His breath was a little tart, but she had gotten used to it. Well, imagine if you hadn't spoken up and said anything. It might be a different story on the television. It may have been one of those stories again. Another one shot dead where the cop claims he felt threatened. It's not just right, baby. I've seen all kinds of stuff on the beat. I feel sort of in a bubble because I know the violence will never probably happen to me and probably not you either, since we're both lily white. She laughed. He continued, it just bothers me that things are the way they are now. White cops can pretty much get away with whatever they want. You should hear some of the conversations in the precinct, how the guys talk among themselves about minorities. I've even seen Schmidt put up a poster that had a black face with a target on it and a picture of the white cop using it as target practice. Sick. Wow. My gut feeling is that things aren't going to change until white people start speaking up against it. Sad to say, but seems like it's true. Seems like the more they protest in the streets, the less stuff gets resolved. I'm not saying we got to be the great white hopes, but we got to make sure our voices are heard right along with theirs. I'd say you made your voice heard loud and clear last night. I'm proud of you, dear. Well, at least that makes one of us who is, but I'm definitely on the Schmidt hit list. I really caught him off guard. He chewed me out when we got back to the precinct, asking me whose side I was on. Right. The side of right was what I told him. He didn't like that and told me I'd learn soon enough, but to never challenge him like that ever again. So we're going to stop right there in that part. But you kind of get a sense of the pressure and the challenge that, I don't know, perhaps goes on with those within the same race, right? Because it's a very touchy, kind of sensitive kind of issue. And again, one of the reviews that came in was, it said that the author shows a lot of skill in talking about hard to discuss topics. So again, that just kind of makes me kind of ponder. It's a conversation that I had to imagine happened. I mean, I've never been privy to this particular conversation, but I think it's a really interesting kind of perspective to see how, I don't know, how some whites question other whites, or how things may not necessarily change unless things go against the grain of what one might expect. The second reading is here. This is a little bit more animated. This is going back to the diversity meeting that I mentioned, where there is this exercise standing up for what's right. And I'm going to try to read a little more animated here because these are some interesting characters. So I'm going to skip about, but I think we'll get the gist. Again, so this is Becca starting off. She's asked 2 questions already, and now she's getting ready to ask the 3rd question, and here's where the fireworks start. All right, here's the 3rd one. Becca proceeded. All students should be encouraged to support gay rights and its political agenda. Yes, that's great, voiced Marjorie, as she hurried and stood. Her standing wasn't enough, however. Indeed, we've got to teach this next generation how to be tolerant and point them toward being a more enlightened generation than we were. Mostly all agreed and stood except for the obvious ones. Nico had stopped cleaning and tidying as he had become engrossed in these questions and responses. He sipped some coffee as things seemed to be getting heated. As Garnett sat and grinned, she prepared her mouth to rebut, but was forestalled by another sharper, louder voice. That's absolutely ridiculous. There is no way you all can sit here, well, stand here, and think that statement makes any sense. It was a voice that belonged to none other than Lay, a student who had A student who needed to meet her about a missed exam had detained her in her office. She had quietly entered the meeting room and had gone by the lunch area to choose from what remained. She held her plate of a half a tuna sandwich and some fruit and made her way over to an empty chair by the wall. Nobody would have to guess what her vote was on the matter, as she sat down deliberately while she had the floor and everybody's attention. Directing her attention to Becca, she dug in. I know this is the diversity committee, but I have a serious concern about saying all students should have to do anything. Our role is not to make anybody feel the same way about anything. I can sort of see what Leigh is saying, added Sato, who was the rep from faculty services. Some of these students have been raised with deep religious convictions, so it doesn't really seem fair to force them to have to support a cause or agenda that goes directly against what they believe. Well, a lot of times they don't support that community because of fear, Marjorie countered. Fear? Of what? Why does it have to be about fear? Responded Leigh indignantly. Just because I don't agree with an idea or cause doesn't mean I'm afraid of it. That's a very narrow-minded statement, Marjorie. I honestly believe that most people who can understand the plight and struggle of the community are just trapped in fear. I'm sorry. It's similar to how whites didn't respect the rights of the Black community in the Jim Crow South in the early, oh Lord, I knew it'd be just a matter of time before somebody would go there and bring that up. That's what's called a fallacy of false equivalence. Marjorie, please don't allow me to go into why those two scenarios are not and will never be the same. The gay struggle is not the same thing as the Black struggle. I get so sick of people trying to equate that struggle with racism. It's not the same. Oh my God, are you serious, Leigh? Do you even hear yourself right now? I guess you haven't heard what happened during the Stonewall riots of the 60s. Or I guess the name Matthew Shepard doesn't ring a bell for you, huh? Yes, we all know how the few mild indignities in your community are to be equated with the systematic exploitation and institutional degradation that Blacks had to endure. They are not equivalent struggles, Marjorie. Leigh smirked and chomped on a juicy piece of pineapple. Oh, she could be so sardonic, and it was getting under Marjorie's skin. Just turn on the TV and open your eyes, Marjorie clapped back. You'll see the discrimination and violence we have to endure. We're still struggling to get health benefits and the like in the event our spouses die. We have no protection. Well, talk about all injustices equally. Let's have discussion about all injustices, not the same thing all the time. I just hate when you all play the victim as if you're making no progress while we're over here suffering to no end. And then you try to bully everybody just to get what you want. That's why I'm glad the Supreme Court ruled the way it did and supported that man who refused to make that cake for that couple. Enough bullying is enough. Bake your own cake. Well. That Leigh is something else, huh? But I think it gets at, again, the sharp contrast between two opposing views. And in a nutshell, again, this is, it is a novel, right? But time and time again, you get these head buttings, and in certain cases, I will give you heads up. In certain cases, things don't work out well when there's confrontation. And other times there are situations that give me hope, right? Because there are two competing views that where the person disagrees with the other one, but they do it respectfully, right? So that's the gist kind of the book. Now, I will say this in closing. It's not all drama, it's not all vitriol, it's not all head buttings. As I mentioned before, this is a dramedy. So there is some comic relief in the book. So in between crying, you can laugh. In particular, there's a character named Celeste. She is unhinged. She knows how to bring a joke out of everything, right? And as an author, I think, of course, that was deliberate, because when you start talking about these really heavy topics, it's just good to know that there are some moments where you can kind of laugh, right? And it's very contemporary jokes. So if you've been around listening in the last two years or so, you'll kind of understand the jokes there. So, but
excellent. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. That's great character development. And again, you always need those comic relief moments. So that's exciting. We do have a few questions from the audience. So one of them is this your first book?
This is not my first book. It's my first novel. And I say that tongue in cheek because, you know, when you say this is your first one, that assumes that a second one is coming. And I don't necessarily have plans, but before this one, I wrote a book called Lemonade. And that's more of a memoir where I kind of share my experiences growing up and some of the challenges that I faced, some of the obstacles. And that's called Lemonade, inspired by actual events. And the notion is, what do you do when life gives you lemons? You know, that is really trite. Add a little water, add a little sugar, add a little faith, add a little hope, stir and enjoy. So it just talks about a lot of the triumphs I overcame and how I was able to get to a point now in New York where I'm a professor.
Oh, that's excellent. So what's it like to write in multiple genres?
It's, I must say, the novel experience was much tougher because the memoir, hey, it's your life, right? So you can't go but so wrong there. But with a novel, it forces you to think in a way that you're not necessarily used to. And as I mentioned before, you have to do a lot of research. It's more than just saying, oh, this is what I think happened. It has to be believable. So there were days upon days upon days where I literally had to do research. Oh gosh, even one of the chapters talk about something called the jingle truck. So in Afghanistan, a lot of the troops, they would just kind of just be there, and all of a sudden you hear this jingle truck coming, and it's called a jingle truck because at the base of the truck, you hear bells, right? And a lot of people, and I found this out in the research, the jingle truck would come because they would have certain treats for the troops there, and the American troops would just love to hear the sound of the actual jingle truck coming. So it's that kind of research that I had to do to make sure that although it was a novel, it still had to be lodged in truth and fact. So
right,
it was tough.
I'm sure. So how long did it take you to write this book?
Yes, so this one on and off took about between 3 and 4 years.
Okay.
And that's only because I write on the side. I have to sort of squeeze it in before, in with my day job, which is a professor, right? And that was also the challenge of it too, because say, for example, if I took 3 months off, of course, in my mind, I have to remember what the whole situation was when I started again, right? And true confession, there were some times where I got some of the characters mixed up. And so when I started back writing, I would put the wrong character with the right scenario. So that was a challenge. And so I had to say, oh, wait, this is supposed to be this character. So yeah, it took about 3 years on and off. And we finally ended up kind of bringing it together. And then I forced myself just to finish. I said, this is not going to take, you know, too much longer, because then the references would kind of become out of date. So.
Right. Yes. Good work takes time. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you have a great style of reading. That was a very engaging way to present your words. Have you ever considered making an audiobook from this?
You know, I have. I thought about it, and I still may. The only audio that I have right now is kind of something that that's similar to this right here, where I just sort of go through and talk about the book itself. But that may be something I look in the future. I guess I would have to have the patience to do it. Maybe, of course, do it over several days and, you know, try to make it so that I can keep the energy up or embody the character. But you're definitely not the first person who's asked me to kind of do that. So it may be in the works. I just got it to the point. So in terms of the formats, so we have paper book. We just recently got the hardcover. So we have the hardcover and we have an ebook. So I guess the next logical one would have to be the audiobook.
Absolutely. Yes. Keep that trajectory going. We do have a comment from Kate from Facebook who says, thank you for sharing this newer book. Lemonade made me reflect on family and how I can be a better family to those around me.
Oh, great. So I guess I'm assuming she's read Lemonade.
I'm not sure. It doesn't say in there, but we can certainly put, if you want to go back in the video and comment, maybe give a little brief, like a little snippet maybe of that book, that would be excellent. Because again, you know, once you have fans, they want to read everything that you've written.
Right. Yeah. And actually, it's interesting you brought that up, because Lemonade actually started out just being a a journal for me,
Uh-huh.
because there's a point in my life where I had to go through counseling because of some things I dealt with. And
Mhm.
it just really started off as being a journal. And afterwards I said, hey, maybe I can sort of develop this like into a book, you know, perhaps it can help somebody else who kind of went through because a lot of times people kind of see you like in the last stages of like where you are or this current stage, and they just think
Mhm.
that you were born a professor. And
Right.
I think Lemonade just kind of sheds light on the fact that it's really a journey, and I had a lot of things I had to sort of overcome. So,
Mhm. Oh, that's very inspiring to hear.
yeah.
Absolutely. We have one more question. So I know that you said it doesn't necessarily mean that you're working on a second book as like a series or anything, but what are you currently working on? Is there any little side projects, maybe some short stories, another novel in the works later on?
Yeah, it's in my head.
Uh-huh.
But I don't and it if I do it, and again I don't want to commit to it,
Mhm.
but the things that have been swirling in my mind now about whether it's going to be a different novel or something else, it's probably going to deal with the nature of being single,
Mhm.
because our culture, especially the American culture, places a certain stigma on being single, and
Mhm.
that if you're single, something is wrong with you, or you know, you just have to be married. And so I thought about doing a novel where many of the characters are single. I don't know, perhaps maybe they were married before, maybe they got divorced or whatever. But
Mhm.
it's to address this elephant in the American room of what does it mean to be single, and how does one see him or herself if they end up not getting married the rest of their life or whatever. I mean, so again, it's things swirling in my mind. I'm not going to commit to it, but that's kind of where my headspace is right now. So
Well, at least you have some thoughts to think about.
yeah.
That's great. Yes. Well, that is all the questions that we have for you. Again, if you all are listening out there and you have questions that you think of later on, we do check these videos periodically. So please feel free to comment even after the fact. And again, Bernard, we want to thank you so much for joining us on Zoom Into Books, and we wish you the best of luck with all of those ideas.
Thank you so much. Again, it was really my pleasure. I'm really excited about it, and I'm really expecting great things for 2021. So thank you.
We all hope that that is true. Yes. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day.